iPhone versus Galaxy. It's the age-old, often compared what do you prefer question. But hey, let's not stop now. We know the Galaxy S8 has a fantastic camera, but how well does it hold up against the 8-month-old Apple flagship, the iPhone 7 Plus? Welcome back to Byte Review. This is the Galaxy S8 camera versus the iPhone 7 Plus. As always, let's run those specs quickly before we get started. The Galaxy S8 is rocking a 12 megapixel sensor, an aperture of f1.7 and optical image stabilization on board, and the iPhone also has a 12 megapixel sensor, an aperture of f1.8 and OIS 2. Both cameras have been set to auto with auto HDR enabled. First off, you're likely going to notice the colour difference between these two cameras, and it's really easy to assume the one that looks more colourful has taken the better image, but that's not always the case. This photo is a good example. While I prefer the photo from the Galaxy in general, the iPhone captured what it was really like. The clouds in the sky were that white, and the sea did have that green tinge like the iPhone shows. But which one would I rather share on social media? Well, for me, that's got to be the S8 here. In this photo, I think the S8 has done a much better job overall. The orange of the boat pops out a bit more, there's less noise zooming into those darker parts, and the sea still keeps some detail. Whereas the iPhone has this kind of oil pastel effect glossing over the sea. That's not to say the iPhone can't best the Galaxy, because it still can. I prefer the exposure on the iPhone in this shot for instance, and the colours are closer to how the scene looked. The S8 has kept more detail in general, but overall I think the iPhone takes this one. Here's another example of how bumped up colours can make a nicer photo. Again, the iPhone keeps things more realistic, but I prefer that added oomph from the S8. The saturated blue to the sky works in its favour, creating a more dynamic image, whereas the iPhone colours look a little flat in comparison. Let's talk colours, because a lot of the following shots will be down to what you prefer. Now, I've made it pretty clear that I like bumped up colours in mobile photos, which I think are great for your instant social media share, but it might not be for everyone. This photo is a good example of this. The S8 photo jumps off the screen at you and makes it look like there's a fresh lick of paint on that door. Sure, the iPhone keeps it more lifelike, but the punchy colours of the S8 make this image much more appealing in my opinion. Zooming in, you really can see the difference between the two. The same is true in this image, the Samsung bumping up those colours to really exaggerate the red against the white wall, while the iPhone keeps things a little more muted. The iPhone still can't always be beaten by the S8 however. On the surface, this shot doesn't look too different. However, zooming in shows the iPhone pulls out much better colour separation between each house, and has an overall better exposure than the S8. This shot is a good example of the S8 going a little overboard with the colour boosting. It's actually difficult to make out the panels of the wood on the blue door compared to the iPhone, as it all kind of melts into one on the S8. Interestingly, the light blue on the right hand side is actually more accurate in the S8's photo, while the rest of the photo is more accurate from the iPhone. It's a bit of a strange one actually. In terms of detail, the S8 does tend to win out in most situations, with the classic Samsung sharpening. Zooming into this photo shows the S8 manages to pull out a good amount of detail from the little figures, keeping the definition rather well. The colours have been exposed well too, while the iPhone looks a little bit mushy this close in. It's a similar story here. Zooming right in, you can easily make out the bucket, bottles and paint tins on the S8 thanks to the overall better exposure and the more detail the Samsung manages to pull out. The iPhone hasn't kept the exposure as well as the S8, and it's a bit of a dark mush on the objects in there. Sometimes detail can be harder to pick out. On the surface, this photo doesn't seem too different between the two cameras, but again, zooming in, things become more obvious. The crack in the wood towards the top is a good example. Notice how the iPhone smooths over the wood, making it seem like it's all kind of connected, where the S8 manages to pick out those individual grains of wood. Moving on to low light now, and in terms of that, I was impressed with how the S8 performed against the Pixel in the last video, and that seems to hold true here too. There's better exposure on the path from the iPhone, but zooming in, the noise difference between the two is what makes the S8 a bit of a standout winner for me. This photo is a prime example of the S8 going nuts with the colour. The differences here are pretty crazy. The iPhone has taken a much truer to life photo, while the S8 adds in that wacko blue look to the whole image. However, another zoom reveals that the S8 does do much better with noise performance than the iPhone. Whichever shot you prefer here is up to you, but despite the crazy colour addition, I'm still in favour of the Samsung. In this shot, it's still easy to see the colour bumping from the Samsung. but I think again it makes for a better image. Exposure wise, the iPhone has kept things pretty dark overall, while the S8 has made better use of the available light from the scene. A closer look at the edge of the tree shows that difference quite a lot. Moving under the tree, you can see the iPhone suffers from the obvious noise in the sky and on the top of the leaves. Again, a zoom in makes this more obvious. This is also another example of that huge colour difference between the two cameras in low light. The differences are a little harder to make out when there's less of the sky in the shot. However, there are still some subtle variations here. Both cameras have blown out the sign, which is a bit of a shame, but the S8 has got a better overall exposure on this photo. And again, zooming into the shot, it shows a lot less noise too. So that rounds us off for this camera comparison. Declaring a winner here feels a little redundant because I think a lot of those photos are going to be down to your personal preference on which you like. As I've already mentioned, for me, I like those bumped up colours in a mobile camera. I think they're perfect for social media sharing, so for that the S8 would be my go-to camera. However, I'd love to hear what you think, so be sure to tell me which one you prefer in the comments below. Thanks for watching this comparison, be sure to leave a like and I will hopefully see you all in the next one.